Hello and welcome back to More to the Story. I'm Janna Maron. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. In addition to this podcast, I'm also a book coach and editor for women writing nonfiction. You can find out about my services and working with me at my company website, moretothestory.co. And I'm also the editor and publisher of a literary arts magazine under the Gumtree. We publish what do we publish? There was a little hesitation just there. Creative nonfiction and visual art, and you can find all about Under the Gumtree, subscribing and submitting your work for consideration to be published at underthegumtree.com. Thanks for being here. I'm just putting my phone on Do Not Disturb so that notifications don't come through. I'm moving my notes around on my desk and getting all situated. I'm going to have a sip of water as we get started here. Okay. A little bit of exciting news before we get into the topic for today. It's March 18th as I'm recording this episode, but it's not going to publish until March 31st. And so this past weekend, I was out of town. I was in Palm Springs for a conference called Alt Summit. I've mentioned it in the last couple of episodes as I was preparing to go. So now that I'm recording this episode after I've been back, I returned home, got home late last night, Monday night. It's Tuesday morning as I'm recording. And on my front porch was a delivery from bookshop.org. I have started ordering my books from bookshop.org. If you're not familiar, check them out. It's where you can purchase books and support independent bookstores instead of buying books from Amazon and supporting the huge billionaire conglomerate, as we know. So the book that was on my porch, I'm going to hold it up and show you. For those of you who are looking and watching on YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening on any of the podcasting platforms, thank you. Regardless of where you're finding me, thank you so much for watching and listening. I'll put a picture in the show notes because the cover, I think, is really beautiful. And this book is especially exciting for me because it is by one of my clients, Christina Larocco. The book is called Crosshatch, Martha Schofield, the Forgotten Feminist, 1839 to 1916. It's part biography, part personal essay. And when I was looking at this book, I got it and I was like, doing a quick little Instagram share, and I'm just going to flip through the pages. I mean, of course, it looks like a book. If you're looking on YouTube, you're like, why is she flipping through the pages? It looks just like a book. Of course it does. And I open the front page, and this second blurb right here on the front page is from me. And I was like, oh my gosh, so exciting. My blurb is right there, blah, blah, blah. And I was doing this Instagram video, and I was about to share it. And as I was going to push share on Instagram, I got even more excited and surprised and deleted that video and redid it because my quote is actually on the front cover of this book. So if you're looking on YouTube, you can see it. I'm holding it up and pointing to it, but if you're listening to the audio only, head on over to Substack, moretothestorypodcast.substack.com, where you can see a picture and you'll see my quote on the cover of this book. And I'm just going to read it out loud because it's so cool and fun to see something like this. It says, Crosshatch is a thoughtful blend of biography and personal essay, a precise, sharp, and witty voice illuminating that history is made while we live out our everyday lives. And then right under that, it says, Janna Maron, editor and publisher of Under the Gumtree. I'm so proud, super excited, and I had the opportunity to read an advanced copy of this book so that I could write that blurb, and it's a really beautiful book, and Christina has just done such an amazing job of integrating the biography of this woman, Martha Schofield, who was a feminist during now I can't even come up with the terms of the historical time that she was living. But she lived from 1939 to 1916. So it was during the suffrage movement. It was Christina has integrated some of her own personal essays about living through the political moment that we are living in now. She started writing and working on this book originally during the 2016 election. So it was the first time there was a lot of political upheaval happening in America. And she was starting to see parallels between her own life and between this woman's life, Martha Schofield. And that was where the concept of this book came from. And it's really beautiful and wonderfully written, including the fact that Christina is from Pennsylvania. Martha Schofield grew up and lived in some of the similar areas to where Christina is living contemporarily. So just like this parallel of what's happening between these two women's lives more than 100 years apart. It's really fascinating, really well done. Shout out to you, Christina. Don't know if you'll ever hear this episode. I hope you do. But just wanted to share that because it's a big, big, exciting moment when a client's book comes out and you can finally hold it in your hands. Okay, so moving on to the topic for today, what is a book coach? And I realized since I started this podcast or relaunched this podcast with a new format, I've been kind of talking and doing these topics, assuming that you maybe are discovering me because you already follow me on Instagram or you already are subscribed to my email list. And while I was at Alt Summit, the conference that I was just at over the weekend, I had the privilege of hosting a meetup for authors. It was a meetup on authors and publishing, and it was specifically for women who, because the conference is for women only. So it was specifically for women who are published maybe or author curious, and it was really for anyone, for people on any spectrum of the authoring publishing journey. So we had people who had self-published, we had people who had an agent, we had people who were working on a draft, we had people who did hybrid publishing. Like, it really was this beautiful amalgam of women, which is very representative of the clients that I work with, because I have clients on all of those different paths as well. I have a client with an agent. I have several clients who are getting published with a hybrid publisher. Christina's book here is from what we would call a small press, a small independent press. I have clients who have self-published. So I've been working with clients on all ends of the publishing and authoring spectrum, and that really was what was representative at this meetup that I hosted at this conference. And toward the end of the set, and it was completely organic and not like I didn't have anything planned beyond have a sign so people could find me. And I feel really excited because there were about 15 or 20 folks who came and sat down and talked and chatted and kind of came and went during the course of the hour that we were hosting this meetup. Happened to have a literary agent there, which is a very rare thing. You very rarely see agents out in the wild unless you're at a book writing agent conference. This was not one of those. It was a conference for women in business and women in creative businesses in particular. There's a lot of illustrators, designers, visual artists, and I think that's kind of like the niche of where this conference started, and I think it's slowly expanding into just independent businesses, but it still has this like creative focus. So a conference like that, you wouldn't normally see a literary agent. However, one of her authors attends this conference, and so she came, and it was an opportunity for her to potentially meet some authors that she might like to represent. She told me that half of her list of clients are like books that are by illustrators. They're like illustrated books. And so she was looking specifically for that type of potential new client. So anyway, all that to say, I had the opportunity to meet her in advance of the meetup and chat a little bit. And it didn't even occur to me to tell her, oh, I'm hosting this meetup. Oh, would you come? And then she ended up coming, which was awesome because the meetup turned into this like little mini session with a book coach and a literary agent sitting there answering all these questions from these authors who some were self-published, some are even the self-published folks were considering trying to go traditional maybe next on their next book. One woman has had agents reach out to her because of what she's doing on social media. Others were in the process of starting to write or have started writing, and they are trying to figure out their best publishing path. And so having access to a literary agent to help answer some of those questions from the agenting side, from the traditional publishing side, was really valuable and beneficial. It was a really great event. But anyway, all of that to say, right toward the end of the meetup, somebody asked the question, well, so tell us about what is a book coach? Like, what does that mean? What is it that you do as a book coach? And I realized, I have not even answered that question on my podcast. I'm sure I've answered it in my emails, but the emails are weekly. You get them once a week, and then there's no real way to access the archive of my emails, although I am considering other options for making the archive available, maybe using Substack. We'll see. There's ideas that are percolating that have come out of that conference for me around some different things that I can do here on Substack. But that's a whole other conversation. We'll save that for another day. So somebody asked, what does a book coach do? What is a book coach? What does that mean? And like I said, I realized, I haven't even really talked about that on my podcast. So that's a great question to talk about coming out of Alt Summit. This podcast is publishing the week after I will also have been at AWP. I'm getting ready to leave for that trip this Saturday. I'm saying this Saturday. I'm leaving on the 22nd of March. By the time you listen to this podcast, I'll already be back home after that trip. It's a little weird recording so far in advance, but it's one of the things that I have to do that. Otherwise, I'm not going to be home at all next week. I won't be able to record podcast episodes. So that's the reality of trying to plan ahead. But after having been at Alt Summit, after having been at AWP and meeting lots of new people, I hope you're finding me. If you're finding me after being at Alt Summit, thank you for being here. It was so great to meet you. If you're finding me after being at AWP, great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It was great to meet you. I love doing those types of events for the sheer opportunity of meeting as many people as I possibly can all at once. I never get that opportunity unless I go to these conferences where people are gathering organically, right? But for me, it is tiring, which is something I'm going to talk about on next week's episode. So be sure to tune in next week for a little bit more on just managing health and energy regardless of what it is you're doing, whether it's traveling, attending conferences, or just like your creative work on a regular daily basis. That's what I'm going to be talking about next week. Okay, so talking about what is a book coach on the heels of having been at these two conferences, hopefully meeting lots of new folks who are finding me and coming to the podcast is a great opportunity to talk about what it is that I do as a book coach. Okay. So first and foremost, I'm also going to mention another resource on Substack. Jeannie Nash is the writer behind the Substack publication called The Art and Business of Book Coaching. So she's writing primarily to book coaches. She is a resource for book coaches, and she has a certification. So if you're interested in becoming a book coach, you can go through Jeannie's certification and learn what it means to be a book coach, get trained on how to be a book coach and how to run your business and find clients as a book coach. That's what Jeannie does. And she has this great post right on her main page called, What Does a Book Coach? What is the title of that post? I think it's What is a Book Coach? And then in the post, she's answering questions like, what does a book coach do? How is coaching different from editing? And so I just quickly kind of skimmed through that to see what she had to say and if there's anything I would add to it or say differently. And there are a few things, but her post is a really great kind of like high level overview of what is a book coach? What do they do? And so now I'm going to tell you the answer to those questions from my perspective. And you're maybe wondering, Jeannie has a certification for book coaches. Am I certified? Well, I'm not, but I don't think that it requires certification. I mean, it's a little badge that you can put on your profile or on your website, and you could probably have access to a community if you're coming out of a program like that. and you have kind of built-in support around how to handle situations with clients or how to find clients or how to differentiate yourself in the marketplace and all of that. So the reason I haven't done a program like that is that I have professional experience. My entire career has been in writing and editing. Literally, the first job I had out of college was as a newspaper staff writer, and from there, and my bachelor's degree is in English. My master's degree is in creative writing. Right out of college with my bachelor's degree, I started writing for a small community newspaper. I did that for 3 years, and then I was the managing editor for a local publishing company that publishes community consumer magazines, and I did that for 4 years. And after that, I was in grad school. I finished my master's degree. I started teaching at the local community college, which, by the way, as a community college teacher or any higher education teacher for that matter, if you're reading and responding to student feedback, to student writing, guess what you're doing? You're editing. You're giving feedback on writing. And so I was doing that for almost 10 years. Meanwhile, I was also freelancing as a writer and an editor. During that time as a freelancer, one of my clients became my biggest client, and I was getting most of my work from him. And so then he hired me full-time to be the editorial director of his agency. We were doing books. We were a book agency. We were a book editorial agency. We did all kinds of book projects for online entrepreneurs who were primarily self-publishing. We did do a couple of books for clients that were traditionally published and, yes, even hit the New York Times bestseller list. From there, because we were an agency, that means we were serving many clients all at once. Similar thing happened for me as a freelancer. One of our biggest clients acquired our agency, and so then our agency team became the in-house team for this client of ours who was also doing books, and so we did all of his books. So I have been doing editing, feedback, book projects, managing book projects, writing, editing my entire career, which now is more than 20 years. Okay? So and I am by nature someone who is strategic, meaning if you have a book project, and what this was my role at the agency, and then in my previous job as a content director, okay, we want to publish a book. Okay, great. What's the timeline? Well, I was in charge of creating that timeline, setting the deadlines, holding everyone on the team accountable, including our boss, the CEO, who was the author, and he would have to be writing all the content. So I would be holding him accountable to meeting deadlines for his writing and reading and reviewing and giving feedback, and working with another editor on our team to massage and shape that content, and hiring out with designers and hiring out with printers, and that I was managing and running all of those projects. So by nature, I am also a project manager. Not all editors are project managers. When you think of a managing editor, typically that's what that person is doing. They're managing the editorial project. So I say all of that to say, personally, with my experience, I'm not somebody who feels like I would benefit from additional training or a certification to put by my name with the type of work that I'm doing. So what does a book coach do? Okay. And I'm going to tell you how I do it, right? Because there are plenty of book coaches out there. There are plenty of writing coaches out there. Writing coaches are not the same thing as book coaches. There are plenty of author coaches out there. Author coaches are not the same thing as book coaches. There are plenty of creativity coaches out there. So everybody's going to do it different. Everybody's going to have a different style, a different flair. Basically, what I tell people is, and it's funny because somebody asked me once, like, what is it that you do really well? And my answer to that was kind of a joke, but also kind of not. And really the thing that I do well is I tell people what to do. And not in a punitive or like a disciplinary way, But what happens for authors, and maybe you're listening to this and you'll think, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about, is you're writing, you're collecting all this material, you're generating all this material. Now you have to figure out what to do with it. Or you have a complete manuscript and now you have to figure out what to do with it. Or you want to get published and you could self-publish, or you could try to get an agent and go after a traditional book deal, or you could try to do a hybrid and you don't know what to do. So you come upon all of these forks in the road and you have to make decisions and you have to decide what you're going to do, and you don't know what to do. And you're unfamiliar with the process, and you're unfamiliar with the landscape, and you're unfamiliar with the market, and you're unfamiliar. You don't really have a sense of your place in this bigger picture. And so basically what I do is I help you make those decisions. And yeah, when you're talking to me, I can generally intuitively sense like, oh, this probably would be the best choice for you. Here's why. And I can help you kind of figure out the path forward. And so that's what I mean when I say, oh, I tell people what to do. And my clients really kind of latch onto that because they find themselves in these positions where they end up like with analysis paralysis. They're like, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And then they're just like, oh, I don't know. Like, just tell me. Like, Janna, just tell me. And there's like this little inside joke with my clients where they say WWJD. And if you are from the 90s old school Christian world like I am, WWJD was this trendy thing for a minute with these little bracelets that had WWJD on them, standing for what would Jesus do, as this little reminder to like be on your, behave in the world as Jesus would behave in the world. But then my clients have taken it to me to like, it's a joke. It's a little play on that WWJD because I'm Janna, starting with a J. What would Janna do? And it's turned into this little thing of inside joke of like, yeah, that's how they kind of like think through problems and challenges and get themselves unstuck and get themselves to keep moving forward. So what am I good at? Yeah, I can help you figure out how to move forward. I'm really good at helping you take action. Okay, so what does a book coach do? If you think of any other type of coach, like for a sports team, the coach is the person who's training the athletes, giving them exercises to improve their skills, motivating them, helping them take action, holding them accountable to they figure out the training plan and hold them accountable to that training plan. And then when the athletes are on the court or on the field, the coach is kind of just on the sidelines, like cheering them on, looking at the big picture, like maybe seeing a few things here and there that the athletes on the field can't see for themselves, and shouting out direction a little bit maybe. But for the most part, once the players are on the field or on the court, the coach has to kind of like let go and release them and trust that all the work that they've done leading up to that moment of performance, now they're ready and they can go off and do it on their own. But yeah, maybe they need a little bit of like cheering and like you can do it, like keep going kind of raw action from the sidelines, and I do that too. One of the things that Jeannie Nash says in that post, answering the question, how is coaching different from editing? And I'm going to address this next because she talks about how writers, when they finally get feedback on their writing, it's kind of like this, this like relief, or this, maybe I don't remember if it was like relief is totally accurate the way that Jeannie was writing about it, but this like appreciation and kind of satisfaction of having an editor and someone else pays such close attention to their work and their writing and really like digging into the material in a way that up to the point of having an editor, no one else has except for the writer. And Jeannie says that the coach, a book coach, is someone who pays that kind of attention to the writing and the writer. And I would agree with that for me personally, because in addition to being a coach, I am an editor. So I always say that I'm a book coach and an editor. And the reason for that is not all coaches are editors. So I would take a little bit of issue with this perspective that coaches pay this kind of attention to both the writing and the writer, because from my experience, not all coaches are editors. And certainly not all editors are coaches. And the reason for not the reason, but the way that I can speak to this is that I know there are plenty of editors who will mark up a manuscript, write up a manuscript review, an editorial letter, and deliver it to the author, and that is the end of the engagement. The editor will deliver the feedback, and that is the end of the engagement. That means your contract is ended. The writer has fulfilled, the editor has fulfilled the terms of the contract. They've delivered the deliverable, and that's the end. Maybe they have some sort of agreement in the contract or in the arrangement that the writer can ask questions by email. But for the most part, if you're working with someone who is just an editor, that's typically the end of the working relationship. Unless you hire them again after you have implemented that feedback on your own, and now you want them to look at your manuscript again. That's a new engagement, and you're on your own for implementing all that feedback and review. Well, for me personally, I cannot separate my editing from my coaching, which is why I call myself a book editor and a coach. I say I'm a book coach and an editor, because I will review your work and I will give you feedback and I will write up a huge manuscript review editorial letter, and then I will continue to work with you. And that's the way that I set up our arrangement, is that you're getting feedback pretty quickly up front, and then we keep working together on the revision, and our arrangement does include a second review. If you want it to, I will review your revision. Because what happens is you're potentially getting overwhelmed with this huge dump of like recommendations for your manuscript. And remember when I said at the beginning, writers come to this crossroads and they feel like they don't know what to do. They don't know how to make decisions. Not that you don't know how to make decisions, but you get paralyzed by the choices and by the options, and the overwhelm is paralyzing. I am still working with you and talking through how to implement that feedback, how to implement those revisions. You have an idea and you want to just kind of like have a thought partner and talk through an idea, go back and forth and refine it and figure out the best way to implement it. That's part of what I do as a book coach. And book coaching means that we're working on a book. So there are writing coaches out there, and that means you can work on any kind of writing, and it doesn't have to be a book. And it's more about establishing a writing practice, improving your craft and your skill as a writer on any sort of project. There are author coaches out there, and that's much more about coaching you on how to develop your career as an author. How do you want to present yourself online? What kind of publishing opportunities do you want to look for? What kind of courses or conferences do you want to attend and participate in? Or are there courses and offerings that you could create and offer as a way to have another revenue in a stream, instead of just trying to depend on getting paid from your writing, or eventually getting a book deal, which most writers, if you follow, another person to follow online is Jane Friedman. And she's got I think that her book is called The Business of Being a Writer or something like that. As I'm saying all of this stuff, I have to write down what are the links that I need to remember to include in the show notes for you. I'm pretty sure her book is called The Business of Being a Writer, and she has a second edition coming out in April. And one of the things that she talks about all the time is that most writers have multiple streams of revenue, multiple streams of income that they count on and depend on, in addition to anything that they're getting paid for their actual writing, and their actual writing, including book advances, is not their primary source of income, including book advances and book royalties if you've earned out your advance. Those income streams are not usually their primary forms of income. Okay. So that's what an author coach would do, is really looking more at your overall career as an author, and how to develop that and position yourself and find other ways of generating revenue for yourself as an author. So when we talk about a book coach, we're working with writers who want to write a book and figure out how to get it published. And Jeannie in her post also says that book coaches work with authors from idea conception all the way to the finished manuscript, which, yes, absolutely we can. However, I have many clients that have come to me with a partial manuscript, with what they would maybe consider a complete manuscript, because it has 100,000 words or whatever. But they end up working with me on a revision or a rewrite. So you can engage a book coach really at any stage. And most of the time what I find that my clients are either somebody who has had an idea for a very long time, but they've never started because they don't know how to start. They feel overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. It feels scary. And they just don't know what to do. They want to write a book, they have an idea, but they don't know what to do. And so they haven't started. Those are the typical clients that I get. And the other typical client that I get is somebody who has started on their book project and they have come to a point where they're stuck. So they have some amount of material, whether it's a lot or a little bit, they have some amount of material and they're stuck because they don't know how to finish. They don't know what else they need. And so I am really a combination of an editor and a coach in that case, because I need to read what they have in order to help them figure out what else they might need and get them moving forward with generating the last of the material that they need to complete a manuscript. And some of my clients only work with me until they have a finished manuscript and then they move on. Others have continued to work with me through the publishing process, because once you have a complete manuscript, now what are you going to do with it? Well, I can help you with that. I can help you figure this out. And as I've said in previous episodes, really everything, it all comes down to what is your vision for this particular book? What are your goals? How do those goals support your vision? What is your vision for yourself as an author and a writer? What are the goals that support that vision? So you have a vision that encompasses two elements, the vision for the book and the vision for yourself as an author. Because the vision, and that's really important distinction, because the vision for yourself as an author is bigger than the vision for this one particular book that you're working on, ideally, because if you expect that maybe you'll have more than one book, that's where the vision for yourself as an author expands beyond the vision that you have for just one book. And I help you figure that out. So that's another thing that I do as a book coach. One of the other things that came to me while I was hosting that authors meetup at the conference over the weekend is really, and maybe this is because I'm a nerd and I really enjoy gathering information, or I like keeping track of like what's available and what's out there. I'm somebody who can point you to resources that can help you, like I'm doing in this podcast with Jeannie Nash, with Jane Friedman. The meetup that I hosted, I had this list of resources for finding literary agents, because that's a question that I get a lot of the time. People will come to me and say, okay, I know that I need to, if I want an agent and if I want to pursue a traditional book deal, I know that I need to query and pitch agents, but how do I find the agents to query and pitch? Well, I created a resource for that where there's a list of places that you can literally find agents and what they're looking for, what they're asking for, whether they're taking pitches or not. I can turn that into a download. So go to, you know what? I'm going to have to tell you to just go to the show notes for this podcast episode. If you want that download, I will send it to you. There will be a link in the show notes for you to get that download. I need to make a note so that I don't forget to do it. Agent resources download. Okay, so go to the show notes for this episode if you want to get that list of resources for how do you find literary agents. I just created it for the conference over the weekend, and so now it is available. You can get the download. But I was saying all of that because that's another thing that I can do as a book coach is I have this wealth of knowledge that maybe you don't have as somebody who's newer to the world and you don't know where to start and you don't know where to look. Well, I can point you in the right direction. And as I've been talking, I'm realizing, okay, I do personally feel like I've been a little all over the place in this episode. And part of that comes from the fact that, guess what? Every person I work with, every person listening to this podcast episode is going to have different needs. And so the other thing that I do is I really tailor what I'm doing based on your needs. So do you have a book idea and you don't know how to start? I can help you. Do you have a book idea and you've already started and you have a few chapters or a few thousand words and you don't know how to keep going? I can help you. One of the things that I did at the conference over the weekend was I'm also doing this for AWP, but by the time you're listening to this, it's too late. You can't grab a spot. I made a calendar link available to schedule time with me for a free 15-minute book coaching session. So I sat down with this one woman who has a book idea and she was telling it to me, and she said she had talked to a ghostwriter who told her that the ghostwriter didn't think that this woman had enough material for a book. And I was like, well, tell me what your book idea is. So she's telling me, and as she's telling me, I knew exactly what was happening and maybe why the ghostwriter said that to her. She was talking like her thoughts were really jumbled. She was talking kind of in like all of these little like loops and circles, and like I could not figure out what her book would be about from the way she was talking about it. And so I said to her, because she wants to write a book about the framework that she uses in her business. And so I said, okay, talk me through your framework. And so she started talking through the framework, and the same thing was happening where it was like something over here, something over here, something over here, something over here. And I could not figure out how it was all connected. And so I said to her, okay, let me show you something. I took out a piece of paper and I drew my framework, which I realize as I'm saying this, and I think I've said this in previous episodes, I probably need to do a couple podcast episodes on my framework. It's a pyramid. And each side of the pyramid is a pillar, and then there's levels inside the pyramid that kind of all build on each other. I'm not going to get into what they are right now. But so I drew this for her on a piece of paper and walked her through it. And I said, now, this is the framework that I use when I work with my clients. And the beauty of something like this is I can turn this into a table of contents if I wanted to. And then I took all of the elements of my pyramid and I numbered them. Like I turned them into a list with numbers next to them, because it works into a table of contents with 3 parts. And each part has 3 chapters. And then you tack on an introduction and a conclusion. And now you have 11 chapters. And maybe Each chapter is actually 2 chapters. So maybe instead of 9 chapters, there's 18 chapters, because one chapter is the explaining the theory and the philosophy behind the topic. And then the second chapter is either a personal story or a client story, like a story that illustrates the implementation of that topic. And so I explained all of this to her literally on the back of a piece of paper with like a colored pencil, because that's what she had to use and I didn't have my own pen. And so I said, okay, so what does your framework look like? Like if you were to draw it out, what does it look like? How are the things ordered in a shape? And she was like, oh, she's like, I've never done that with my framework before, but I can see it. It's a circle. And I was like, okay, great. Like you don't have to do it for me right now, but figure that out for yourself, because then all you have to do is number the elements of your framework to turn them into a table of contents. And she was like, it was like this, this light bulb moment in her head. So I can do that. So you have an idea, you have a concept, but you can't figure out how it might turn into a book. I can do that. You have started and you have a couple thousand words, but you're stuck and you can't move forward. I can help you. You have a complete draft, but now you don't know what to do with it, and you know it probably still needs a little bit of work, like it needs some revising. I can help you with that. You want to go after a traditional book deal, and you don't know if you should write the book first, write the proposal first, query. I can help you with that. So it's so varied, and it so depends on where you are in your process, what your goals are, and that's just it. I can adapt and accommodate and help you regardless of where you are in the process. So what other questions do you have about what a book coach is, what a book coach does, what a book coach can do for you, what is the value in working with a book coach? One of the things that Jeannie writes about in that post that I mentioned, and it will be linked in the show notes, was kind of the reason, or kind of the history behind how and why book coaches emerged as a profession, because of publishing as a whole changing, and how publishers used to have the bandwidth and the capacity to take on authors with potential, nurture them, help them develop concepts, walk them through the process of writing books. But they don't have that kind of bandwidth or capacity anymore, because of how technology has changed the industry, because of how sheer growth and quantity and volume of authors and writers wanting to be published has changed the industry. One thing that I come across, especially in the writing and the literary world, are writers who kind of bemoan and are very wistful thinking and wishful for the days of past, the days of yesteryear, when publishers did have that kind of bandwidth and capacity to nurture and help authors grow and develop a career, and they wish for that for themselves. And yes, that sounds very romantic, but the reality is that this is the day and age that we live in. It's 2025. And if you want that kind of attention and that kind of support, that's what a book coach can do for you. Yes, that means you're making an investment, but that's one of the things that we do for ourselves as writers, is that we invest in ourselves regardless of whether that's attending a workshop, attending a conference, getting feedback on our work. We have to invest in ourselves if we want the success that we say that we want, and potentially working with a book coach is the type of investment that'd be just the thing for you. So what questions do you have? Leave them for me as a comment on the show notes, and I will be happy to answer them in the comments there. And also, potentially, if there's any questions that require a future episode, happy to do that too. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for being here. This is More to the Story, and I will talk to you again soon. You can follow me on Instagram at Janna Maron. You can follow Under the Gumtree on Instagram at Under Gumtree. The theme song is written and produced and performed by my husband, Janna Maron, who is Existential Wine Guy on Instagram. If you're into wine, follow him. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you soon on the next episode of More to the Story.